Hi, I'm Kevin Werbach, professor of legal studies and business ethics at the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania. For decades, I've studied emerging technologies, from broadband to blockchain. Today, AI is promising to transform our world. But AI needs accountability, mechanisms to ensure it's developed and deployed in responsible, safe, and trustworthy ways. On this podcast, I speak with the experts leading the charge for accountable AI. Trey Causey was, until recently, the head of responsible AI at the job site Indeed. We talk in our conversation about the current state of the responsible AI or AI governance field, what it will take to make those groups more effective within the enterprise, the unique challenges of AI governance for employment sites, and the effectiveness or non-effectiveness of regulation in this area. Trey, thanks so much for joining me on the road to accountable AI.
It's my pleasure to be here, Kevin.
What would you say is the biggest thing that people on the outside don't understand about the practice of responsible AI or AI governance?
Yeah, I think there's really two things that kind of intersect, actually. I know you asked for one. The first is this is just, brand new technology and exposing kind of problem and you could say like attack surfaces or problem areas in ways that we've never seen before. So,
Mhm.
before when you were building traditional software, if you wanted someone not to do something in your software, you just wouldn't enable that functionality. And now you have these general purpose models like LLMs. They're powering things that by design enable kind of, whatever you would like to do. The other thing I think is there's so much attention paid to AI right now, and
Mm.
the dialogue is so heated and charged, and there's a lot of polarization, and there's a lot of expectation that we are further along in how to regulate and govern and use this
Mm.
technology than we are. And so those two things together is like kind of a potent mix, right? And I think a lot of people outside don't understand that we're working really hard to make sure we're developing and deploying safely here. But it's really brand new territory.
What can you do to address those fundamental problems that it's such a general purpose technology and some of these systems are non-deterministic?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, I think some of it is unknown still, right? We have this, we have a lot of guardrails we can build into. We can build
Mhm.
technical solutions, observability, and moderation, detection of bad behaviors, things like that. And of course, there's the political solution of regulation and so on. But we actually don't know how to perfectly deploy these systems yet.
Mhm.
And so, in a lot of ways, like we have to think about how we design the software, who's involved in designing the software, who's involved in building it, how we kind of take into account humans and how they use software throughout. It's a software development lifecycle problem, kind of end to end. But even at the end of that, you can be the most careful developer, the most well-governed and kind of accountable organization, and you're still fundamentally dealing with models that are quite unpredictable sometimes.
Mhm. You wrote an essay recently, which is the reason I wanted to talk to you now, that was called Responsible AI is Dying, Long Live Responsible AI. And I found a lot of what you said there really compelling. Let me first just ask you, what motivated you to put out that piece?
Yeah, it's actually something I've been stewing on for a while. I
Mhm.
recently left a role as the head of responsible AI for
Mhm.
Indeed, and I didn't want it to seem like it was a commentary on Indeed because it wasn't. It was a commentary kind of industry wide. But through talking to my peers in responsible AI and AI governance, and through watching how these things unfold, I was just getting the growing sense that we haven't yet figured out how to really build robust, responsible AI organizations, or if that even is a thing
Mhm.
we should be building. To answer your
Mhm.
previous question around how do we do this, responsibly and effectively, I think what I saw was really large variance and influence of organizations across industry. We saw really differing approaches to governance, sometimes very compliance and regulatory focused, sometimes very much more on the kind of humanistic and ethical
Mhm.
and kind of social justice side of things. And regardless of those approaches, what I often saw was a conflict between the business and the intent to kind of govern the space. And I mean,
Mhm.
that's the story is old as time, obviously. But I think because this space is so new and so much is being asked of these, small organizations, these responsible AI organizations, I think I wanted to kind of, you know, pull back the curtain a little bit to show like, hey, there's a lot of problems here for how these things are moving, and I'm not sure that we've settled on the model yet for how to be effective. I still fundamentally believe in the missions of responsible AI. I still think it's something we absolutely have to do, but I'm watching as companies divest from their open AI, from their responsible AI teams, and as they kind of downsize. And you know, I kind of jokingly said it in the piece, but I meant it. Like, it's very rare that people that have AI in their job title right now are getting laid off, but that's not true for responsible AI organizations. And so, if
Mhm.
revealed preferences and so on, I mean, it
Yeah.
seems like either the value is not being seen or it's not being seen as important. So, wanted to maybe start a conversation around that,
Yeah.
and here we are.
No, I think you did. Absolutely. It's really important one. I want to get into the specific points you make, but let me first just ask about something you said that there is this tremendous variance in terms of how organizations are going about this activity, how they talk about it, how they describe it. Is that a feature or a bug, especially given the newness of it? Shouldn't we have a lot of experimentation as opposed to saying we know the one way for every company to do responsible AI?
Absolutely. I think that really is a feature. And the reason I even highlight it is when I see that they're kind of equally being hit in terms of downsizing and kind of lack of
Mhm.
influence, which kind of suggests to me that it's not necessarily the organizational model or
Mm.
approach that's kind of what's driving the disconnect that I'm seeing. But I do think you're right. Like, we haven't landed on it. It is brand new. There's a lot of competition in the kind of marketplace of ideas in this space too. You have the AI safety folks who tend to be a little more focused on existential risk and super intelligence. You have the kind of very, AI ethics folks, which tends to be more academic and very much focused on systemic social issues. I think responsible AI floats in the middle somewhere with, security and privacy, touching those pieces as well. And so I do think a variety of approaches will be needed. I also think when budgets are up and reviewed and hiring
Mm.
and laying off is done, one of those viewpoints is going to win ultimately. And
Mm.
I'm not sure what it is. Yeah.
Yeah. The first point that you make is about technical competence, or at least the lack thereof in a lot of responsible AI teams. Why is that so important?
Yeah, this is actually something that I was reluctant to believe for a while. It's something that I like personally have a bias for because I come from a data science background. I work in machine learning engineering, kind of, and coming from that, so am cognizant of the fact that I might just be saying like, "Hey, you should do what I do because that's the right way to do it." But I think what I ended up seeing in my own kind of work as well as talking to colleagues is being able to really work closely with the engineers and product teams that are developing, deploying those models,
Mm.
is it like being able to help build the solutions to build those things responsibly is really important. Being able to kind of pitch in at their level, speak their language, et cetera. Like, not only is there like a credibility component to that, which is real, don't get me wrong. Like, there's also just a, hey, I know you can't prioritize this because you're trying to build the features that are going out right now. So let me help you by building the scaffolding that you can ship these things with. Let me help you by building the testing and evaluation frameworks that you can
Mm.
ship these things with. And then that's going to help you ship faster and more confidently and so on. And that was actually what really landed. And when I've talked to some of my peers in the industry, in the responsible AI industry, they would often say, like, wow, it's like a really different approach to go that way rather than kind of other ways. And really impressed to see how you've made it happen because I think there was some skepticism that we could do that. And I'm proud of that.
Mhm. What was your pathway to get into doing this kind of work?
Yeah, it's interesting. I kind of stumbled into it. So I was a sociologist originally, and I did computational sociology, which is something not a lot of people know about. But I used natural language processing to answer social questions, and that was 15-ish years ago now. I was in my PhD program during 2008. As an academic, you probably understand the implications of that for academic jobs. Um, and luckily at the time, this thing called data science was popping up, and I said, "Hey, like, I'll give it a shot." And so I actually didn't do much with responsible AI for a while. And then a gentleman that I managed, Dan Tabor is his name. He's now at Spotify. Brought it up as an idea at Indeed, and we said, "Yeah, this is great." And this was 6 years ago, 5, 6 years ago, and it's like great. And he ended up leaving, and it was one of those situations where I was like, I think I have a lot to offer here, and if
Mm.
nothing else, I know how to build teams and how to start things up new. And then it just kind of became, the more I did it, the more I realized this was something that I could offer and I could drive at the company. I understood the company well enough to have the influence, to have like the seat at the table and make things happen. So a little bit of a full circle, like I spent a lot of my life thinking about things like inequality and social change and things like that, and sociology. Didn't think about it for a while, and then kind of came back full circle.
Mhm. And talk a little bit more. You alluded to some of the things that you were able to do at Indeed in terms of
Yeah.
actually bringing that technical expertise in.
Yeah, sure. So, we had this kind of model of working, which was we had data scientists and engineers and researchers on our team. They would kind of approach things as research in some ways. Like, how would we identify bias in a model, or how would we moderate the output of an LLM or something like that, and kind of would build in a researchy way the code
Mhm,
to do that. And then we kind of proved that it worked. And it's like, okay, well, we have hundreds of models. We probably need to do this in an automated way. So let's automate these analyses that we did. And then once that kind of worked, we say, like, this could probably be something that we could ship to the rest of the company and like through an
mm,
API or something, a library they can embed. And then it would go to that. So we kind of just continually did that research,
mhm,
automate, scale. And so we had, a variety of things, bias analyses for sure, LLM guardrails and moderation for sure. All of those things kind of working at really large scales with the kind of data that you see at a large internet company. And that was generally our approach for almost everything we did. Now, we did a lot of like one-off analyses and advising and things like that as well. But anytime we could, we thought, how can we turn this into a tool that if you were an engineer, you could just reach for and use?
mhm. Isn't the endpoint, though, that those become tools that someone just builds and sells into companies, as opposed to every responsible A group having to build it themselves?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think there is a lot of that. And don't get me wrong, I looked at plenty of vendors and we
Mhm,
engaged with vendors and bought
mhm,
their tools sometimes too. Every tech company, it's like an current problem. Every tech company has their own infrastructural issues that require specific integrations and so sometimes it's easy to build things yourself. But it was also true that when we were doing it, there weren't a lot of vendors selling these things, and so we were kind of first movers. And it was also the case that the things that were being sold were very much not at the level of rigor that we wanted, necessarily for work. And because Indeed is a, jobs, matching employment marketplace, like that's a highly regulated space. And so a lot of
mhm,
times the level of rigor we wanted to achieve just to even kind of operate that space was not something we could ask a vendor to do necessarily.
mhm. Is there anything that's fundamentally different, though, about AI versus other kinds of, technology, risk, and governance that, companies deal with cloud computing and software
Yeah,
as a
yeah.
service and, data governance and so forth? Is this you think an AI issue, or should all of those be more technically driven?
Well, if I look at the kind of really successful places where those things are
Mhm,
run, you kind of have the two options. You have the compliance focus, which is often, lawyers and policy experts and so on. And then you have the implementation side, which is often engineers. So if I think of like, DevOps became SRE in production engineering at places like Meta and Google and so on, it's actually a pretty similar trajectory, I would say, is
sure.
that we actually were more successful when we found we had engineers who specialized in this area, and we have privacy engineering now and all these things too. I don't think one obviates the other. You absolutely still need the legal and compliance side of things. The other thing I would say though too is we sometimes use legal and regulatory and governance and accountable all as kind of synonyms. They actually all mean different things. And I don't have to tell you as someone who went to law school, but lawyers are there to protect the company and make sure they're not breaking the law. They're not there to advocate for user interests or make sure we're following best practices or anything like that. They have enough on their plate already, and so having that domain expertise is
Uh-huh.
also really important. But I think it's TBD how much AI is really different, right? Like, I do
Yeah,
think the non-deterministic part of it
yeah.
is pretty large, and I think there's a level of certainty that maybe you can get in other domains that you can't get in
Mhm.
AI, and we're expecting it like I said, we're expecting it faster than we did in other domains, but, that could all change. It's a very fast-moving
Yeah.
field.
Yeah, absolutely. So, second point you make in the essay is that the failures of responsible AI people see and the successes they don't see. You don't get credit that you
Yeah.
prevented something bad from happening in a company. So, I guess I had the same question. Why is that a particularly AI problem?
I don't think it's actually a particularly a problem. I think that actually is a problem or, potentially, a characteristic of any kind of governance organization.
Mhm.
I think, and maybe this gets to points later in the essay. responsible AI as a field kind of positioned itself a little differently, I think, than potentially security, privacy, other functions did. They position themselves as more proactive, as like, we're going to make the software better for people. We're going to instill the right, values and principles and so on. And so that kind of proactive stance, in a way, is their own undoing, or our own undoing in a lot of ways, because I think you're like, well, what are you doing to make it better then? Like, it sounds like, this bad thing happened. You didn't stop that. And that's, of course, an unfair comparison because you can't see the good things that were
Mhm,
prevented. But I do think positioning yourself as
mhm.
the we're going to make things better group can be a challenge. Does that make sense? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Are there metrics, or KPIs or something that a responsible AI group can use to surface more of the benefits they're creating?
I think the closer you can get to the core business metrics, the better off you're gonna be. Like, I don't think, bad things avoided is a metric you can really track, and it's, you can't measure a counterfactual sometimes. Um, I kind of jokingly, one time asked if maybe we could track the a number of, the amount of money we would lose and fined if we were found in violation of a law, and, uh, I was told I couldn't do that because that might be seen as we were thinking about not complying with the law, and we didn't want that to happen, and we never were thinking about not
Thank
complying.
you, legal,
Uh,
yes.
yes, exactly. But that up and to the right metric is really hard to find for a lot
Yeah.
of things, and so I do think that's in the kind of OKR KPI driven world that we're in right now. That's a real challenge, and if you look at other kind of hard to measure functions like design has struggled with this for a long time,
Mhm,
right? Like, what's our up and to the right? Like, yes, we can measure revenue and so on, but we don't know how much of that was because of the design and so on. And they've kind of faced similar struggles, although we all have a kind of intuitive sense that design matters for product development and so on and so forth.
mhm.
But it took a long time to kind of make that case.
Is the answer then for a responsible AI group to just reframe to not have the perception be that that's what they have to do?
It's a good question. I think that might be part of it, right?
Yeah.
I think in some sense there is a line in the sand that your company's leadership draws to say, like, we
Mhm,
believe in doing what's best
mhm,
for our users. We believe in not being biased. We believe as much as possible. We believe in, trying to make all the right choices that we can.
mhm,
And if there's not a regulatory kind of impetus for them to do that, then it really does become like, what's the company's values and how are you going
mhm,
to embody those values? And so sometimes that is just what it is. I'm not going to say that's going to be everywhere, and maybe it is also the case
mhm,
that we will find those metrics. My old organization, we would celebrate our ships of tools and
mhm,
APIs and everything, just like another engineering team would say, like, here are the things we delivered.
mhm.
And of course, there are steps removed away from revenue and so on, but that was a little easier, I think, for leadership to grok than
Sure.
we made sure that we're acting, ethically, and that can be hard to swallow, I think, from a financial standpoint sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. The third point that you make, and I love the title for this section, was epistemic overreach and the lack of product market fit. And especially for me as a business school professor, I know people who use terms like epistemic, and I know people who use terms like product market fit, but they're usually not the same person. So I'm really curious how you thought about and put those two things together.
It's a funny point when you put it that way. I hadn't thought about that. I think sometimes when you're kind of like deep in the AI community, it is one of the more academic crossover communities that you find in tech. And so, like, there are a lot of PhDs and former non PhDs and grad school dropouts. And so I think you hear these kind of words more than you might hear in normal kind of engineering circles. Um, Also, I think because there's just been a lot of ink spilled about what the epistemic foundations of responsible AI and AI safety and AI in general are. I mean, I have, random people who I think 5 years ago wouldn't know what AGI is, asking me, like, what I think about specific arguments about AGI sometimes,
Would-
and so I think these words are leaking into the
Yeah.
zeitgeist as a result, but I think they're actually very related for me, right? Like, getting back to that, here's what responsible AI said it was gonna be, and here's what
Mhm,
we said we were about, and the problems we were
mhm,
gonna solve, and it touches every part of the business and its design and its engineering, its privacy, its safety, and so on. Um, that's kind of the epistemic overreach, thinking that one group can kind of set the tone across many other disciplines. I'm speaking very broadly here. Like, I don't think there's one person sitting out there being like, oh, I think we're going to do all this, but painting with a broad brush. And then at the same time, there wasn't a demand for that necessarily. And so, like, a lot of companies, like, they don't need an overall person to tell them if things are going in the right direction or not across the board. They need them to say, like, here's what we need to fix. Here's how we're going to fix it. Here's how we're going to develop it. And so I think when we were in the zero interest rate phenomenon era of a few years ago, it was a very, lofty thing to have those kind of broad thinking, very ambitious, epistemically ambitious groups. And that became harder to swallow, I think, when money was no longer free. Uh,
Yeah. Does that mean then, again, is the answer you create a responsible AI group that just very narrowly defines its function?
I think the answer is maybe the opposite of that, which is
Yeah.
you try and
Right.
embed responsible AI into many functions.
Okay.
And I think, that's, you can't do that just, you can't start from zero there. Like you probably do
Mhm.
have a responsible AI group that sets the tone and helps
Yeah.
drive things. But I think asking that one small group of people to kind of own that entire space as companies scale, as they're building more, as AI enables
Mhm.
them to build even more, I think that's unrealistic. And so I think it comes down to how do we, going back to the values part, like how do we make sure we have a set of values? These are the things we believe about
Mhm.
what we should and shouldn't do with AI. And here's how we bake that into how we develop software. Now, other disciplines have done this successfully. I mean, human-centered design is a good example of this. Like, I think
Mhm.
even mobile first is a good example of this. I mean, I was at Facebook not long after the mobile code red, when, it was decided like, "Oh my god, mobile is actually a thing, more than half our traffic is here," and, like, now everybody gets an Android feature phone to try and figure out, like, how to use Facebook on it. Um, and so I do think it's possible. It's just we're like with everything with AI, we probably shouldn't be having this conversation yet because, like, the industry's so new and the field's so new, and yet it feels like it's overdue at the same time. And so I think that's kind of where we're at. And I think to the epistemic overreach part, if you make the responsibility, not to overlay the term, of how AI goes at a company, the kind of
Mhm.
purview of a small group of people, that also kind of like divests the agency of the rest of the company to also have a hand in that
Mm.
to, and they feel
Yeah.
like I'm going to go to them, make sure they sign off, and then I'm going to go back to doing my thing. And so I think there's actually kind of a counterintuitive effect there of they're watching it, I don't need to worry about it, let me just do my thing.
Mhm. I hear this a lot from people in this area, which makes a lot of sense that ultimately responsibility needs to be driven throughout the business. It can't just be up,
Yeah.
somewhere in one group. But there's not a lot of people out there like you who have data science expertise, sociology expertise, when thinking about these big normative questions. So are there things companies can do to really promote that activity throughout the company?
So yeah, this is a tough nut to crack. I feel like on the one
Yeah.
hand, I feel like there's lots of resources out there, right? Like so in the hiring space, Indeed got together with LinkedIn and ADP and Workday and the Future Privacy Forum and actually produced a set of best practices for AI and HR. Said, here's you don't have to hire a responsible AI team to come up with these. Like, here you go. And to get Indeed and LinkedIn and ADP and Workday to all agree
Mhm.
on something is like no mean feat, right? So I think those kinds of best practices exist. I do think it's harder when you start evaluating vendors who are saying they're going to solve your problems for
Mhm.
you, or you don't incentivize acting responsibly within your performance management system or something like that. And so there really is there's like a cultural component, there's like an incentive component, and there's also an education component. And all when you hear those three words together, you don't hear like quick change. You hear like,
Sure.
oh, this is going to take a long time to implement, and so on.
Mhm.
That doesn't mean it's not the right choice, though. I think.
Yeah. As you mentioned, employment is a very regulated area, and it's an area where there's been a whole lot of attention for a long time to
Yeah.
questions about, in with regard to AI and analytics, bias, explainability, and so forth. Can you talk about any of the more distinctive things that you were involved with at Indeed in terms of doing AI governance in that sector?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we had a very rigorous evaluation procedure for our models. Before there was any regulatory burden to treat AI any differently, we had bias evaluations in place. We asked job seekers to self-identify with their demographic information so that we could use real data, evaluate how these models were behaving with respect to various groups, and really did a really rigorous practice test. So, like to give you a sense for how rigorous that was, for every bias analysis we did, we would write up a design document. That design document would have what's our definition of bias, because as it turns out,
Mhm.
it means lots of
Yeah.
things. How are we going to measure it? What are the decision criteria? Like, how will we know if we've detected bias or not? How are we controlling for false positives? How are we setting kind of power and things like that appropriately? And then everybody involved, like legal, us, the product teams, would all sign off on that before we did any analysis, any work, any data collection as well. So I was kind of said, like, you can't, bet on roulette like after the wheels stop turning. And so you also can't define bias after you've started looking at the data. And so we always took like a really rigorous approach to like, we're all agreeing this is what we're going to do if we find X, Y, or Z. And I felt that that was really like, it's not innovative, it's just science, but like you
Mhm.
don't
Yeah.
find a lot of like pure science sometimes in industry. And so I was really proud that that was the approach we took.
You
And then we turned that into automatic APIs and so on and so forth so that we could increase our coverage of our models. And so then when regulation came along, it was often not difficult to
mhm,
comply with it.
mhm. The first point that you made, though, about defining bias, as you note, is not a simple matter, and they're different
Yeah.
tests, and in some cases, they're formally inconsistent, and they're
Yes.
trade-offs.
By
Um,
definition, yeah.
by
Yeah.
definition, yeah. So,
Yeah.
how would you work through those questions where there were multiple choices, all of which could be a reasonable way to define fairness?
It's a really good question. One of the things that we always tried to do was take the perspective of the user, the job seeker, to say, like, what's the worst kind of error the model can make, right? And so, we all like, if you've taken an intro to stats class, you've heard of the like, would you rather your smoke alarm chirp a little too often, or would you rather like the automatic pilot, disengage too often? And so, like, those are different kinds of errors, and false positives and false negatives matter differently. And so, we would always kind of take the perspective, like, what would be the what would deny an opportunity unfairly, or what would potentially send the signal that a job seeker is not as qualified as they were incorrectly, and then kind of work backwards from there to say, so this, because of this is the kind of metric we're going to use. And then some of it was determined like empirically, like, oh, it's this kind of number, it's a score, or it's a category or something. So you had to pick like specific statistical tests to work with that. But and then we would use best practices for determining effect size. And those often came from things like the 4/5 rule and other regulations say, like, this would stand up in most legal arguments as kind of prima facie, bias. And so like let's make sure we meet that as well. That was actually one of the most contentious parts of the design process, though, was defining that and making sure this was
Mhm.
the right number. And what happens if the numbers, because we would often have multiple measures, and what do we do if they disagree, and who makes that decision, and so on. So um that's still an open question, I think, for a lot of people. And I went to several events with EEOC attorneys and so on, and they would even say, like, well, as we all know, the 4/5 rule is not a law; it's a heuristic, and they would say it's often not even the most important heuristic, and yet it's the best we have, kind of to go on.
Yeah, and when people don't know, that's the as you
Sorry.
said, the heuristic in U.S. law that if the difference is basically more than 20% between the two groups, that's a
Right.
initial indicator that there's
Yeah,
bias. But
that's right.
um, yeah, but as you say, there that people just sort of take that as a given, and yet it's just a guideline.
Yeah.
What do you
And it's
think
from
about the very
1977 too, I think. So like it's
yeah?
yeah.
But it's clear, right? I mean,
Mhm.
80% is something that everyone can see. Some of the efforts to legislate in this area, like New York City has this local law
Mhm.
144, try they basically said do an adverse impact analysis, and so you can see, for example. Um, what's your take on that, and some of the other efforts to legislate and regulate in this area?
I think I think local law 144 was a well-intentioned law that really went through the ringer in a lot of ways. And I think what came out, a lot of people, including industry and the regulators, are not super happy with the actual final product. And I think both sides will say it's the other side's fault why it ended up looking like that. Um, I thought it was a good first pass. The thing that I found potentially frustrating about it was how prescriptive the analyses were in some sense. Like, and when I say that, it's because I actually think we did more rigorous analyses sometimes,
Mhm.
and that created friction. That can create friction with your legal department. So, like, well, it doesn't say to do that; it says to do this, and so then you have to, make your decisions. And I think specifically with the this is going to get very wonky, but like the continuously valued outcome variables, so like rather than a categorization, but like a score, the analysis proposed there doesn't make total sense to me statistically. And I think others have raised this question as well. But now that it's kind of encoded into law, like, we're doing that analysis, and I'm not sure it's actually making the systems any fairer. And so that for me is kind of dead weight loss, right? It's like we've introduced complexity and bureaucracy without improving outcomes necessarily. That being said, they
Correct.
were the first and they were pioneers, and it's, I
Mhm.
think, been the template for a lot of other people, and I think lessons learned. So I'm glad we went through it for sure.
Yeah, and I know you're not a lawyer, but if you were going to advise a government on how to address this issue of employment bias or AI and
Yeah.
algorithmic bias more general, what would you suggest in terms of the right approach?
You know, s I thought about this a number of times, and I always
Right.
kinda come back to, like, it's a very regulated space already, and it's not always clear to me
Agreed.
that we need additional
Mhm.
regulation for AI. In fact, like, there are some regulations out there that basically say it's illegal to discriminate with AI. By the way, it's already illegal to discriminate. We're just letting you know it's actually illegal to discriminate with AI as well, and which to me
Yep.
is like, I'm not
Mhm.
sure what the purpose is there necessarily, and I think so as a sociologist, when you introduce new institutions, new regulations, you're going to
Mhm.
create constituencies and you're going to create feedback effects and so on. And so I worry about having regulation for regulation's sake in those senses where in a place that's
Mhm.
already regulated. I do think it's a delicate balance as always between industry and,
Yeah.
and the government. But I think this is an area where there's got to be better partnership and there's got to be kind of good faith dialogue. When I say like, hey, this analysis is actually impossible to do, we have to understand I'm saying that because it's impossible to do, not because I'm saying like I don't want to do it, which is
Yeah.
also, something people do.
Yeah. So one more thing is we need to wrap up just to
Sure.
get back to this question about the responsible AI field. As you point out, the pendulum has been swinging in the negative direction. Do you see a scenario or scenarios where that shifts back, and what does it look like?
I think it has to in some sense. Like I think the all gas, no brakes approach we're seeing right now to AI in industry only goes so far. And I think we're in the interim before regulation catches up. And then I think there will be a real, whiplash effect after that. And I think the further we go potentially in kind of a quasi regulated state, the bigger that whiplash effect could be in a lot of ways because, we'll push the boundaries. I do think I mean, this is obviously talking my book here, but I think we could see more embeddings into teams and kind of more like distributed responsible AI versus a centralized responsible AI, capital R, capital A, capital I team, um, that maybe kind of sheds a little bit of the political or ideological kind of associations that might be held there as well. I think that's, we haven't really touched on, but that's kind of obviously looming as well that
Mhm.
there's
Yeah.
a macro political economic environment that this is all happening in. So, but I do think since we haven't solved any of these problems yet, it's hard for me to imagine that we don't have some kind of responsible AI going forward. But maybe I don't have a big enough imagination.
No, I'm with you on that one, absolutely. Trey, thanks so much. Really been a pleasure speaking with you.
It's been great. Thank you.
This has been The Road to Accountable AI. If you like what you're hearing, please give us a good review and check out my Substack for more insights on AI accountability. Thank you for listening. If you want to go deeper on AI governance, trust, and responsibility with me and other distinguished faculty of the world's top business school, sign up for the next cohort of Wharton's Strategies for Accountable AI online executive education program, featuring live interaction with faculty, expert interviews, and custom-designed asynchronous content. Join fellow business leaders to learn valuable skills you can put to work in your organization. Visit execed.wharton.upenn.edu/ACAI for full details. I hope to see you there.